today. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ann Swain. I want to welcome you to Question Time Live on this Tuesday, which I believe is the 23rd of June. Boy, that's gone quickly. I have a great team here with me for this morning's session. First of all, that's Tania Bowers, who is APSCo's legal counsel, and I will focus the questions that you bring in to Tania that are compliance oriented, are legislation oriented, and will give us an update of what's going on and what we can expect as things move on. But I also have Debbie Smith. Debbie Smith, I've known for a number of years. When she was running a business she set up called Caritas that was placing people in the social worker market. She's since created a business called Attenti Consulting, and still part of that same group. What she works on now with a team of 11 core people, plus that extends, is doing consultancy work plus executive search and interim work in again in that social health and social care market, where they put in teams of people to really, I suppose, change manage some of those big departments, whether it be public sector, local authority, could be private organisations, or indeed in the voluntary sector. So an interesting market with an interesting switch from contingent recruitment placing to adding that bit of extra value. I also want to welcome in someone else I've also known for a long period of time, and that's Ross Eades. Ross is the CEO at Red. That's an amazingly well-known, very niche market player that have a niche in the technology market, but beyond that, specifically SAP. Whether that's SAP end user client side or the technical partners, technology partners to SAP itself. They have a great relationship with that business in its own right and across the field. They are in 6 different locations: Germany, in Switzerland, as well obviously as in the UK. It's a very well-known business. They have 260 employees at the moment. Let's see if they're going to keep those 260 employees in the crisis that we're going through at the moment. But I know that their business is sound and their reputation is also sound. Ross has been the CEO of a number of other recruitment companies. A number sounds like 50, but definitely a few other recruitment companies. Is a stalwart of that IT market and knows the industry exceptionally well. Thank you, both of you, for joining me. And what I'm going to do is say to everybody out there, get your questions in early. I say it every week, and then we get that rush of questions at the very last minute, which may mean we don't have time to answer them. So please get your questions in early. But why don't we kick off with this session? Ross, let me come to you first of all. Red is a business that's always been exceptionally niche. You know, it's in a sector, but niche within that sector. Is that the right thing to be in this kind of market? Has it helped you or hindered you?
Thanks for the intro first, Anne. I thought that was brilliant. Thank you for that. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a big fan of niche businesses anyway. And you said like the previous businesses, obviously I headed up Interquest when we had niche model companies within the group. And to sort of spin it forward to today, I think it was put nicely by a lady that I know works for an SAP staffing company in Canada. She said, you know, at the moment, Ross, it's great because the SAP projects are just like IT pregnancies. And I sort of thought, well, I don't really know what you mean, but can you elaborate? And she said, well, you know, it's great, Ross, because once it starts, it has to go on till birth because they've spent so much money on these projects. So I thought that was quite a nice sort of analogy. And we've seen it, you know, we've hardly seen any project stop. So the visibility at the moment of existing projects has been great. It's just really seeing what happens in the future with how many new projects have been stalled. And if they have been stalled, when are they likely to start? And then, you know, it's that big judgment call of the fight for talent, you know, so it's who's going to start their new projects sort of quicker, because they can't all start them at the same time because there just won't be enough resource.
Yeah. And so from the business point of view, how is Red holding up? It's been a difficult time frame, obviously, for everybody. Perm business dropped off a cliff a bit. Contract much less so. How have you found in the last few months the business?
Yeah, I've got to be careful what I say, but I think we've been very, very fortunate. Well, two things really. One, when I came to Red, the infrastructure and technology that we have is fantastic, which I've been very surprised at, because all the other staffing businesses over 30 years that I've been involved in, the back office has always been chasing the front office. So if you had any extra money, you just put it into more sales guys. But the IT team and the infrastructure is absolutely top class. LinkedIn are forever praising us for how good our setup is. So when it came to it in March, we all felt that if somebody got coronavirus in one of our offices, whether it was our staff or somebody just within the building, we'd all have to work remotely. And our tech team had us all set up. Everything is accessible. Well, everything's in the cloud. So we can access all the systems from anywhere. And it was a very swift and thankfully easy move for everybody to start working remotely. So I was very pleased about that. And written business so far this year, we're ahead on contract year on year, which surprised me. And when I say year on year, our financial year starts the 1st of April. So we're basically, just as COVID sort of hit, people had to work remotely. It was the start of our new financial year. And so sort of 9 weeks in, we're slightly ahead of this time last year. And permanent hasn't done very well in the UK, which I guess is no surprise, but it has been strong in the DACH region. So in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. So, I keep pinching myself, and I know that a week in recruitment's a long time, and that's the story this week. Things can obviously change very quickly next week, but we're doing okay. And probably because of my previous experience with recessions, as soon as we saw this coming, I put in a 6-point strategy very quickly to focus on what I feel that's the 6 main areas. And we have an ops board meeting every week to focus on those and update on those. And if it's anything to do with, if we're doing anything that doesn't cover within those 6 points, then we're questioning why the hell are we doing it, because that's not going to help us move forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it sounds well organised, doesn't it? And it sounds calm, which is nice that we're getting to a stage, I think, with this crisis, that people have become a bit more calm. I think this idea of the new normal sounds cheesy, doesn't it? And I hate kind of using it, but there is an element of a new normal. Debbie, from your business point of view, are you at a new normal? Is there a different flavour, would you say, to the beginning of the crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think when obviously we started working remotely during sort of the beginning of lockdown, I think there was a sort of an excitement around that. And so people seemed to be quite industrious. I think in our sector specifically, there was quite a high demand because people needed a short-term level of support before redeploying staff into kind of the appropriate areas of health and social care. Then we saw quite a big drop in demand, actually, which I think sort of came at the same time as that excitement in our workforce kind of drop off. That working from home thing became probably a little bit, the reality kicked in that this was, we were in it for the long haul. It wasn't just a few weeks holiday and then we're going to kind of get back into the office. It was actually, this is serious stuff now. And this is kind of, like you say, the new normal. I do think we're in a position now where we've fared pretty well. And I would probably say from my perspective, I'm having more interaction with all members of the team and across the kind of group businesses as well than I've ever had before. We have a lot of regional offices and people sort of dotted around, quite disparate sort of, populations of people. And actually what this has kind of resulted in is us having a lot more video face-to-face interactions. I think, relationships within the business are stronger. And I think there certainly seems to be more of a sort of stability in our workforce, much the same as our kind of contractor book as well. I think it has now got to a positive place. And I think for us, there are a lot of learns that we've taken from lockdown that we will be taking forward, certainly from, do we work from the office on a slightly more, flexible basis? I think probably we will, because we seem to be in quite an effective place from a kind of outputs perspective. So, you know, people are achieving higher levels of productivity. We seem to be kind of, you know, converting more business, and that's probably because we're working in a slightly more efficient way. You know, we're not traveling to and from meetings and follow-up meetings, etc. We can do an awful lot more in one day. You know, I do miss those lunch meetings where sometimes you kind of, you know, you clock off a little bit early and you have an afternoon off. It seems in lockdown it's been a lot busier, and it's really kind of back to back right the way through the day. But clearly, you know, the outcome of that is that we are getting some really good outputs, and as a business, I think we are stronger than probably we've ever been.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Ross, do you think, look, you've been around a long time in the market, and, you know, we've grown up with people arriving early, being on it, showing they're on it, working late to show they're on it. Do you feel that maybe there's going to be a change of focus of what we expect of our staff? Have we been a bit oriented toward presenteeism, whereas now nobody's kind of present, but maybe they're achieving more? What do you think? Is there going to be a new style of work in the recruitment market?
I think there is. I mean, certainly for the foreseeable future, and we're seeing it a bit in Germany, where some of the people are going back to the office. I can see this hybrid model of some days in the office, some days working from home. And thankfully, you know, if you've got the right systems in place, and I don't mean big brother systems, just systems that obviously cover the activity. We know when people are working, we know when they're not working. We've even got our desk side coaches can listen in on calls. There's this whispering technology, so they can actually talk to one of the sales guys while he's talking to a client. And can help him through the call, or her through the call. So, I think we're very fortunate from a technology standpoint that we have all these things. But to answer your question, I do believe this hybrid model moving forward, where there's going to be far more acceptance and far more trust. And the thing I'm always keen about, I mean, results are obviously important, but everybody knows within Red that I'm very focused on the performance. You know, sometimes you can get a lucky result, but if you're putting in the right performance, you know, persistence will always come through. So they know that activity and the whole performance element, supporting them as much as we can remotely, as well as helping them improve their ratios and tracking what they're doing. So you're right, it will be, I believe, an acceptance of a new model. And if it ever goes back to the old model, I wouldn't put a bet on it.
Yeah, see, look, you're talking about performance and lucky placements, but really it's about the work. It sounds a bit like football to me. I've got my team are playing tonight in a London derby, and I'm hoping that we put in a good performance and don't rely on any luck whatsoever. But it's, you know, there is something about it, isn't it, that KPIs still make a difference, though. Debbie, do you have your team managed with KPIs, or are you a bit more flexible than that? Do you have some of that backbone?
No, I think you need to kind of, in my opinion, give people parameters. What does success look like? What do you need to do to get, you know, it's almost the funnel effect, isn't it? What do you need to do here in order to get to the end result? And I think without that guidance, you know, people often, you know, they don't have that sort of roadmap to follow. So we're really, you know, we don't manage through KPIs, but we have clear KPIs which says, if you want to do well, this is what you need to do along the way. And these are the conversions you need from a quality or quantity perspective. And actually we give people information so they can self-manage. So it's self-service systems that it's a real-time basis. It updates through the day from the CRM and shows them, you know, how many, you know, candidates they've generated, how many contact, you know, calls they've made, all the interviews, starters, you know, how many of those are unique submissions, how many are kind of, you know, all these different bits and pieces. But they can cut the data and look at how they're going each day and through the day to make sure they're on track. And it's not something we use as a stick to say, you know, that's not, I'm not a believer of that, to say you haven't done enough, or you've done a lot this week. It's more to say it's there for you. So, you know, that whole ethos of running your own business, we're giving them the tools to be able to do that, and the guidelines to say this is what success looks like. You know, you can overshoot that, you can undershoot that, you know, you might have a better kind of quality conversion, but actually manage yourself, and here's the data to do it. So there's a lot of data, I think, that we use to sort of try and gauge that.
And information is power, isn't it? I mean, you know, if you know what you're doing or what it takes as you as an individual to make placements, if you keep those ratios higher than normal, ultimately the results come in. Let me come to Tania just for a minute. We've got some questions in, Tania, from a sort of legal point of view. So I hope it's okay to get you off mute and bring you in. The first question I've got is, what is the position if a shielded member of staff does not want to return to the office when the part-time, so there's one running into another. What is the position if a shielded member doesn't want to come back into the office? What can we do about that? Because we've got our members now starting to think about coming back.
Well, I think from the end of the month, we're expecting an announcement to say that shielding people are allowed to go back out at large into the population, so to speak. However, I think if a person does have vulnerability that's meant they've been shielding, and they don't want to return to the office, then really if they can work from home or can work in some other way, or you can adapt a working pattern to suit their needs, then I think that's the first choice. And in most roles in recruitment, that is probably possible. And then to keep it under review would be my recommendation.
What are you going to do when someone's just kind of being a pain in the you-know-what and is pretty much not wanting to come into the office? Do they have rights to not, if everything else is as safe as it can be? If you're providing, there's no risk-free environment, but providing a very low-risk environment, can we force people to come into the office?
Ultimately, yes, you could go down a disciplinary route, but it's really not ideal. So one hopes that, you know, we're making that decision to come back to the office, and there's a lot of communication right from the start as to what you're doing, what needs to be done, so that you don't get to this end game point of people refusing. But I think there will be a lot of problems, particularly over the summer, with people with children, etc., because there's not going to be that sort of wraparound school care that you'd normally get in the summer holidays, or these clubs that you'd get in the summer holidays. So, you know, there are going to be a lot of different reasons why people might need to work flexibly over the coming months.
And do you imagine we're going to see any sort of court battles or tribunals when people haven't been treated in the way they would have liked to have been treated with regard to this? Yes,
I think we're already seeing the employment lawyers I talked to, APSCo affiliates, are already seeing an increase in cases at employment tribunal. At the moment, they're around furlough. Now, there isn't a legal right to furlough, so, you know, realistically, if you're going to have a decent claim about furlough, they would have to be able to demonstrate some element of discrimination or something. But yeah, I mean, I think it's much clearer about returning to work, not being treated fairly, suffering detriment, discrimination. You can see how it wouldn't be that hard to get some claims at employment tribunal. The reality is the tribunal's already incredibly busy since they got rid of the fees. So, you know, this isn't a swift solution to problems. So hopefully that will keep the claims down a bit.
Yeah. If I come back to the two CEOs here, Ross, have you furloughed any staff during this crisis?
Yes, yeah, we've, I was trying to work out the exact number. I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's somewhere between 15 and 20%. I think it's about 17% odd. And I mean, it wasn't done lightly. It was done, we had a whole program that went through a 2-week period of working out who actually can work from home, you know, and you get some people, whether they're renting a room, you know, whether they've got a small flat somewhere, whether all their family are coming home, you know, so some just won't have the right environment to be able to work from home. So that was one category of furloughing. Others were looking at more sort of delivery staff that were in a training program, and it was still very hard, we thought initially, to train them up remotely. And looking at cutting our cloth to suit the demands of the market moving forward. So you know, there's clearly the demand would decrease. It was just how much would it decrease, and could we make the right choices of furloughing the right people at the right time? So that, you know, that was a program that was accepted and understood. And actually this week we've had a number of people start to return from furlough, just because of certain teams have an increase in demand. So we've started to look at, you know, and it's not going to be everybody coming back straight away, but we've had, I think it was 4 people this week that have been identified that there is a need for them because of the demands of the business right now.
Yeah. Debbie, what about you? Have you furloughed staff? I mean, Ross is saying 15 to 20%, which is quite a low percentage, isn't it? Compared to other recruitment companies, other APSCo members we know, which the numbers are normally 30 to 35% of people being furloughed. What about you at Attenti and also, I suppose, in Caritas as well?
Yeah, I mean, across the Caritas business, I think it was, we furloughed 6 people in total. So it's less than 10%. And actually, there were only 3 sales heads in that. Actually, they were generally support heads who, 2 of which had to do full-time childcare, and they literally could not commit to working. It wasn't our, you know, clearly it was our decision, but ultimately when we looked at it, they couldn't carry out the role that they needed to carry out. In terms of the salespeople, it much the same. It was that they weren't far enough along the sort of development program to be able to work self-sufficiently from home. You know, we don't have the whispering call technology that you mentioned, so we couldn't listen in, we couldn't coach them, we couldn't bring them along as we would in the office, and actually, you know, we couldn't guarantee that they'd be able to actually get the traction they needed in the market, even though there was some demand in the health and social care space. It didn't feel appropriate. So we are furloughing those individuals until the end of July, and then looking to bring them back into the business from August, when hopefully we'll be, you know, back into the office at least part-time to be able to help and support them through the kind of learning process to get them back up to speed.
And when you did furlough people, did they see it as a negative that they were being furloughed? Have they changed their minds since? How have you looked after people in furlough?
Yeah, I mean, we've been really careful. We've really stuck to the guidelines in that no one has worked. No one's adding value to the business, because we are very cautious that we don't want that to come back and bite us later. You know, we're being quite rigid with people. So, but not to the extent where they feel excluded, because I think that's important. Saying you can't do anything, but socially we've involved them. You know, we're putting in a weekly call from the line manager to say, hey, how are you? Just a personal call around their well-being. We've invited them to our weekly yoga class on a Wednesday, by Zoom. Our Friday drinks catch up with the quiz, and, you know, we do that. So all the social bits are included in. But also, I think the most important bit was at the beginning, when we did furlough them, we were really clear as to why. We gave them a very clear explanation. And I think some of the conversations I've had sort of sector-wide has been that some people have been furloughed, but they're not quite sure why. They weren't given a very full explanation. And that's probably led, Tania, to some of those people who have felt discriminated against or a little bit unclear or angry about furlough, because I think it's really important to say, you know, this is what we do normally. We're unable to do that now. We will, you know, look to re-engage you, or, you know, you might not be able to commit to that. But at least if you're really open with people and you're having a kind of authentic chat with them about your reasons, I think the people that we've furloughed have been really understanding of our motives. And we haven't so far seen any kind of negativity. And the people that are due to come back into the business in August are really kind of, you know, firing all cylinders and can't wait to get going and show us what they can do, which I think is a real positive, actually.
Are you finding, look, let me come on to this, as you probably know, APSCo run Women in Recruitment as well. And I'm wondering whether you mentioned about people having childcare issues and being able to work from home. Do you think that's very much tied to the women, or is that being more shared between male and female people both working from home? Is there a reality?
Yeah, I've got an interesting example, because I've got a husband and wife team that have got 2 kids at home with no childcare support, and they're sharing it between the 2 of them. So they have a schedule between them of important calls, important meetings that cannot be moved, you know, those immovable blocks. And so they're working around each other's schedules to say, we've got our kids sort of homeschooling in the background. They're younger children, not sort of more sort of self-managed children. But actually, I'm seeing from, you know, people in those situations that it seems to be quite shared, especially if the female has, you know, a role to play in an organisation that is equally status-wise as the male. From the 2 ops staff that we furloughed, it was that, you know, their other half was unable to kind of you know, or their employer was not in any way sympathetic to childcare and was ultimately saying they expect them to work full time or take time off and go part time if they're going to have childcare responsibilities, which I think potentially, because I've got 4 children, I've been quite flexible around it. I'm like, you know what, I kind of get it. If the kids running around in the background, they're a little bit distracting. As long as it's just internal, I'm pretty relaxed about it. Clearly, if it's a client call or something else, I think we need to make sure that you've got the right environment and that you've got some sort of cover there. But I think, you know, depending on how flexible employers are, it's not always possible for people to be able to share that responsibility.
What are you doing with your 4 daughters? So I know you've got 3 of them under the age of 3, for heaven's sake. One, one at homeschooling, I'm assuming. What the hell have you, and you know, what have the 2 of you been doing to juggle that?
It's actually, well, my other half has been working as well, but my poor mother, who's 71 years old, was locked down with us. The poor lady. So she's got her own room here. She comes up from Devon on a Monday normally and goes home on a Thursday. She's basically been with us for the last 15 weeks in lockdown. I think, you know, concerned now. I'm like, you probably need a trip to Devon just to kind of get your sanity back. But it's been unbelievably, you know, helpful. Just she looks after the kids in the day. We're able to work full time in our sort of, you know, respective rooms separately. We go down and kind of help her out, but you know, we've been very lucky that scenario, you know, it arose at the time when she was here. She wasn't in Devon, so she stayed here because clearly we have to shield her because she's 70 and above. She's a pretty fit 70. Clearly, she looks after 4 kids for me all day, every day. But yeah, we have been very lucky. And again, just because I'm lucky doesn't mean I'm not sympathetic to people who, you know, if I'd been locked down with my 4 children, I would hope that, you know, whoever I'm interacting with have a little bit of sympathy that I'm doing my best, but it's not always going to be perfect. And, you know, my work schedule might be need to flex a little bit more. And I think, you know, with some of our staff, they're working earlier, they're finishing later, they're doing a bit over the weekend, you know, they're putting in the hours and the work. It's just happening at different times to what we would see normally.
Yeah. Ross, with your staff, what are you doing to keep them? I mean, are you doing yoga once a week or with them? I mean, what's going on? Or is it more quizzes and drinks on a Friday afternoon? What are you doing to keep them engaged? Are you including the furloughed people to keep them engaged?
It's sort of more of the latter, to be honest. There's more, you know, company meetings and quizzes. And I know in Germany, one of the offices in Germany, they used to do yoga actually in the office. So I imagine they probably still do that, you know, over Zoom. But keeping them engaged, I mean, I send out quite often the CEO update on the business, and the furlough staff get a copy of that. I wrote, after a couple of weeks, I wrote to each of the individual people that have been furloughed, which seemed to go down very well, that they had a personal message from me. And we actually topped up, so we haven't got people that are earning more than the 2,500. We've got an upper cap up to 4,000 for certain members of staff. So, yeah, we tried to keep them in the communications, but making sure that we do stick to the absolute guidelines of what furloughed means.
Yeah, okay. I've got a question here that I'll put to you two. Somebody has written an interesting question. If you've had or are going to have any members of staff that actually have COVID symptoms or they've tested positive for COVID-19, did any of you have that early on in the process, and what did you do?
Shall I answer that first?
Yeah, you go for it.
Yeah. Yes, we had a handful of people actually, and thankfully, you know, they've all recovered. There's one at the moment who sort of ebbs and flows each week. He's quite a senior person in the business. Some weeks he's great, and then he sort of dips. So I say, thankfully, you know, they've all come through the other side. I mean, one we had in our US office, the poor chap wasn't feeling very well, and this was early on. Went to hospital, and you know, they tested him positive, but he went to hospital for another symptom, but they tested him positive while he was in hospital. So, well, you know, it hasn't happened very often. I think there's 4 people, if I remember rightly, and thankfully, you know, they've had the right support from their own families and as much from us. I mean, our HR department have a wellbeing program where they send out each week things about mental health and how to focus on working from home. And they're also accessible, our HR people, for one-to-one chats if any of the staff are finding it particularly difficult, to do their job from home.
And Debbie, what about you? Have you had anyone in the business that has had symptoms or tested positive or been ill and stayed at home?
Yeah, no, I mean, across both Caritas and Attenti, we're very lucky to sort of report that we don't have any official cases so far. In the early days, just before lockdown, when we were still kind of going into the office, there were a few kind of coughing individuals that showed symptoms that were sent immediately home, never tested, may end up getting, the antibody test and realising that they did have it at the time. But, we would, even then, we've been quite cautious and just saying, you need to disappear, go home, work from home until, self-isolate. So, we have been quite lucky. I think across our group at sort of an engaged level, there have been a few incidents of people that have kind of, contracted it, but I think they've all been pretty mild, and we've not seen anybody with any kind of long-term negative consequences so far.
Tania, can I come to you? When people do get back to the office, from a legal point of view, if somebody does come down with symptoms or test positive, what would we be allowed to tell staff? What is the process that one would need to go through if you have somebody coming back and having COVID-19?
Which is going to happen, let's be honest, in all probability. And that's why I think there is an argument against not rushing back to the office necessarily. The ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, have said as long as you're clear to staff, and you might need to tweak your privacy notice, but as long as you're clear to staff about who you'll communicate with, then I think it's reasonable for other people to be told if someone has got COVID-19 that's been in the office. The question, actually, I'm not quite sure of, and I don't think it can be that easy, because I've asked Natalie on the help desk to see if she could dig something out. But track and trace, test and trace, how far do you need to go in terms of isolating people that have been working with that individual? Now, clearly, if they're working in the same room, that's a bit of a no-brainer. But what if you're on a large sales floor? What if you're on 2 floors? I'm not quite sure at the moment that they've been that clear about how far the self-isolation has to extend once you've identified that someone has either got symptoms or has actually been tested. The point is now people will be tested for it if they've got symptoms, but there's still that 48-hour lag. So I don't think it's that clear about how wide you have to self-isolate.
I mean, realistically, we're going to need to know that before people go back to the office en masse. I understand that with camping sites and things, I saw something on the news this morning, that camping sites haven't been open because of shared facilities, shower blocks and toilets. Well, that's, I mean, not shower, well, actually we've got showers in our office, but realistically, shared toilet facilities, maybe that's going to dictate how many people use specific loos as to what the bubble looks like. But it's something we're going to need to know, isn't it, before lots of people get back to the office. I've got a few more questions, if it's okay, that I'll come to you, Tania, on. My employee is vulnerable, but is insistent on returning to the office. I would prefer for them to continue working from home. Can you force people to stay at home if they are potentially vulnerable? What do you do? What's the right thing to do?
I think you can, if they can work effectively at home and you can demonstrate that they're being involved, it then comes back to that detriment issue. Why are they vulnerable? Is there a possible disability discrimination issue in the background? But realistically, I think if you don't feel at the moment, which I think is quite sensible, if you don't feel that you can guarantee a sufficiently secure environment for a vulnerable person, then I think you can, as an employer, say, no, I want you to work for your place of work at the moment is home. and this is why, and this is how we're going to support you and make sure that you don't feel left out of everything. But it, you know, it is a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Some people are desperate to get back to an office and are trying to push their way a bit too early, and some people are desperate never to be back in an office and would quite like, you know, to work from home all the time. And there are people that, if they were furloughed, feel bad about it, and others that have been demanded to be furloughed because they worked pretty hard in the time frame. So there's all sorts. Tanya, let me come to a couple of questions that we had about redundancy, and then I'm going to come to my other panelists and ask them maybe sometimes tricky questions on redundancy. But let's just cover redundancy, because I know a lot of businesses are looking that when that crunch point comes to bringing people back from furlough, even on a part-time basis sometimes, or indeed contributing to their furloughed scenario, people are going to start looking at redundancies. A couple of questions here. Tanya, the first one. Can I offer my employees extended notice period to allow them to find a new role and claim the furlough grant to fund this if I'm going to make them redundant? How does that work?
We've had a little think about that, because we had it come up a few times, well, once I think on the help desk, possibly twice. If you give somebody more notice than you're contractually obliged to give, it's effectively an ex gratia payment. So you shouldn't expect the government to fund you for some extra contractual benefit that you've decided to give your member of staff. I think realistically, you need to give the contractual notice, but there's no reason why you can't give, you know, a decent period of time to communicate about the redundancy process. You can. I don't think there's any reason why, you know, you can't, because obviously, ultimately, you want to try and save their jobs if you can. So you can communicate with people so that they do have a fair amount of notice. But I don't think you can exceed your contractual notice and expect the government to pay for it. So if your contractual notice is a month or even a week, then that is the notice that you could top up under the furlough scheme.
And another question here is, can I use a furlough grant to pay redundancy payments? Can I use that grant to pay that?
No, we don't think. The general view is no, you can't. That would need to be paid. You can use it to pay the notice, although you'd need to top it up to the standard pay, but no, you can't use the furlough to actually pay the statutory redundancy payment. Or
okay, last question on redundancy, and then I'll come over from you, and then I'll come over to my other panelists. But a question here is, do I have to consider alternatives to redundancy before making people redundant? What kind of alternatives should I be considering?
Well, and I think Debbie and Ross probably, you know, can give a view on how they in the past have run redundancy processes, but in normal times, you wouldn't necessarily think about things like pay cuts or cutting commission or part-time working as alternatives to redundancy. Normally, you would just look at, do I have alternative roles for them, suitable alternative roles for them in the business? I think in these circumstances, during COVID times, I suspect businesses probably are looking at more other ways of possibly keeping people on, you know, for another 3-6 months to see how it goes. And that could involve things like voluntary pay reductions. We've already seen that across a lot of members, 20% pay cuts for periods of time. Could mean bonus not being, you know, recognised bonuses definitely aren't being paid out. Could be cuts in commission schemes. But remember that any of these do need to be consensual, and most people, rather than lose their job, will probably agree to them, but they do have to be with consent of the employee. Although if you have a commission policy that's non-contractual and is discretionary, then you should be able to change that just with notification, if you're lucky enough to be making commission.
Yeah, I know I said one question more to you. I'm going to tag a little bit on the end if that's okay, because it's on the same subject and I'll lose it otherwise, really. When do I need to consult both collectively and individually from a redundancy point of view? What is that process looking like now under lockdown?
Well, the timing, I mean, if you're making less than 20 people redundant, or you think 20 people or less are at risk of redundancy, should I say, and that includes people that also have less than 2 years tenure, so they don't have a right to statutory redundancy, then that's just about following a reasonable process, which in normal times would probably take about 2-3 weeks or thereabouts. If you think you're making more than 20 people at risk in the same establishment, and that's actually quite a complex legal issue, what an establishment is, which is why you might, it can be as much as one shop or one office, rather that it's not necessarily your whole business, which is why organisations can sometimes avoid collective consultation, because they're in pockets of different establishments. But if you are putting more than 20 people at risk, up to 99 people, then you need, the consultation period has to be at least 30 days. And if, like British Airways, you're putting more than 100 at risk, then the consultation period is 45 days before the dismissal takes effect, which is why large companies are kick-starting their redundancy processes now.
Okay, thank you for that. So redundancy, I hope it's okay to ask. Ross, first of all, are you going to, have you made anyone redundant? Are you going to make anybody redundant?
I mean, it's quite a difficult one at the moment, because we've looked at, we set up the whole model in the last few years for growth. You know, we've invested in growth, and we've had a good few years of growth, year-on-year growth. And like I say, our financial year ends the end of March, and we grew last year compared to the year before. So we're currently looking at areas to say, you know, no, we don't want to make people redundant, obviously, if we can avoid it. But we're looking at areas of where have we invested on the basis that we're going to see great growth next year and the year after. And quite clearly, COVID-19 has kind of put a dent in that. We say, whoa, you know, so you were going to scale up. You actually now need to reassess that and figure out what are the resources that are needed in the short, medium and long term. And I think we've finalised the short term with the furlough people, and furlough people are starting to come back. And I say it's only been 4 people so far. And we now need to start looking, once we're into our second quarter, which for us, Q2 starts next week in July, to see the shape of the business and to see, you know, I mean, is there any reorganisation that needs to happen? So it's a bit too early for us to actually go through that properly. But the ideal will be that people won't be made redundant. I mean, that's obviously the ideal. But as I mentioned before, a week in recruitment seems to be a long time at the moment. And so, but that's the way we're looking at it. We're looking at it very seriously, and making sure that we have the right blend of people in the right positions for the demands of the market, short, medium and long term.
Yeah, Debbie, what about you in your business? I mean, there's a market there because of the market that you're in, and requirements are coming out. But pretty obviously, you know, most of us planned a business to start, whatever your financial year is, to start and to look a certain way. Pretty obviously, most of us will have slightly different plans. What's happening with you? I mean, your business consults on change. Are you looking at your own business and making changes?
Yeah, I mean, it's literally in progress right now, but we've kind of, because the demand was initially very high and it's sort of dropped slightly now, as we've kind of, you know, as you know, that initial, I guess, period of panic in local authorities and NHS has calmed down. You know, there was that sort of demand there. It's lower now, but the market's very stable. So those contingent workers and interims that are out there are sort of staying put. There's not much movement in the market, which has actually given us a bit of breathing space as an organisation to step back, very similar to the social work market for Caritas as well. And what we've actually looked at is we were looking at making a change in that business from a delivery model perspective anyway. And I think what's the stability of the market has presented the opportunity to really look at the role of consultants and how do we grow the business. And I think, you know, historically, we've always had linear growth through headcount, you know, increasing our headcount. And one of the sort of strategic pivots, I guess, we've made in this period is that we have changed the role of our consultants. So in effect, we haven't made redundancies. It's not a redundancy program. We're not exiting heads, but we have made the role of consultant redundant, and we've created a new role. And actually there's two roles within that, one being kind of retention and the other focused on new business, because actually what we need now, as the demand increases coming through to September in children's services and social care, we do expect a surge in demand as children go back to school and they identify vulnerable children that right now they don't know potentially are out there and in need. Most local authorities are kind of gearing up to this sort of high level demand at that point. So we're gearing our business up to ensure that we are well placed to deal with that increased demand in September, and we have heads purely focused on delivering new business and heads ring fencing and looking after our existing business. So we've redeployed heads internally. We're going through that consultation process at the moment, and we're recreating what those roles look like. So it's a change management program, but there is a kind of redundancy element to it, but we're not looking to lose heads because we do see that demand will justify, you know, our cost base and our headcounts, and, you know, hopefully we'll kind of further increase that from September onwards. But it's a kind of different take on redundancy, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is most businesses, even though, you know, we've all been working quite hard, have had an opportunity just to step back. Most people have reforecast. Obviously, Ross, your forecast was from a January start. Have you reforecast, and have you done a bit of a spring clean and kind of cleared out your larder or your spice rack from all those spices we haven't used for 5 years? It's a bit of a shock. Have you done an element of that in your business, or is that something you're looking at doing? Because it's an opportunity, really, isn't it, to work out whom we want to be when we grow up, really?
Yes, I mean, like I say, ours is slightly different because the financial year started the 1st of April. So it's not as if sort of like a quarter into the year. So really all through tail end of February and March, you know, plans were changed because we could see that from April the 1st, the world was going to look very different, and there was so much uncertainty. So I think we're fortunate in that respect that we were not a quarter in to a new year. It was actually still fine-tuning what we're looking to do in that new year. So that certainly helped. But you know, we've all got extra time on our hands at the moment. We're not commuting into offices. You know, I'm not flying out to New York or flying to the German offices. And it is a time for reflection. You know, reflecting what do we really need. And is it a press of the reset button? You know, what is it we need moving forward? And we're still focusing on that and tweaking it. Like I said, we've got the 6-point strategy that was put in place middle of March, and that's held us through very well at the moment. But there's still new things appearing each week and new challenges that we need to focus on. And you know, the aim is trying to be that 3 months ahead all the time, you know, trying to make sure the decisions we're making today will say we're absolutely right in 3 months' time. And that's the big challenge.
If we look, I mean, look, it's an international business. If you look at what's been going on and what your plans are for New York, and then compare those to the offices you've got in Germany and Switzerland as well, is there quite a stark difference? Both countries, well, and Switzerland, so 3 countries there, have had quite a different COVID experience. Are you planning differently for each of those countries?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we've got our, you know, our RTO, our return to work sort of policy, which is very different in each country. And we've got a good legal team and a good HR team that have been focusing on, okay, what could we do? When could we do it? And thankfully, because we haven't seen a massive dip in the business written, you know, business performance, it's lessened the need to sort of race to get people back in the office. You know, it's been more from people saying, oh, when can I go back? But as you mentioned earlier, we got the whole spectrum. We got people that want to go back, we've got people that are happy working from home, we've got people in the middle, people with children, care issues. So thankfully, I think, when we do return back, we will probably be the laggards in that, because it's working okay at home at the moment. And like I say, Germany has opened up more, although obviously the news over the last few days, they've had more increase in COVID-19 cases. But the 3 offices we have in Germany, people have started to say, can they go back and when can they go back? And some have gone back for a few days. But the teams there have been marking out the floor and working out the areas and working out that only one person goes into the toilets, there's 5 or 6 toilets, one at a time, and figuring out when they know someone's in there, so when somebody comes out. So that whole program is very different with each country. And thankfully in New York, we've always had probably about 30% of the staff working remotely in other states. So for them, it's business as usual. It's just the Greater New York area where they're working from home is new for them.
But also, if you look at New York, office space, APSCo ran a trade delegation at the tail end of last year in December, actually, it's January, it's this year. My God, it was like a decade ago, to New York and to Toronto. Office space in New York is crazy expensive. You're in Frankfurt, obviously in London, Zurich and other places. Are we going to need to spend so much money on office space moving forward if a number of our people simply are not going to come back? Are you considering downsizing any offices?
Well, we haven't, yeah. The thing, when I say Greater New York, our office is actually right on the seafront of the Hudson on Jersey City, looking at Manhattan. So it's a brilliant view of Manhattan. But I think that is going to be an issue. We have, I think it's about 150, 160 people in the London office, right near Bank, in the city, very expensive offices. We were looking over the next few years to move into a bigger office, just because everybody can get into central London, so it's hard once you're in there to sort of move out. And now, I think it will take us a long time before that office becomes, too small for us, because I think we'll have a fraction of the staff visiting or going in there each week. So I do think commercial properties, I do think there's going to be a big issue moving forward, but we haven't looked at it yet to say, what will we do? Because of the social distancing and having, it's quite nice to have people rattling around in an office, but if, over the next few years, I'm pretty sure it will be on our agenda to say, well, actually this office now is too big. Do we sublet half of it?
Yeah. And Debbie, what about you? You've got offices around the UK. Mm-hmm. Is there going to be a difference in needing the amount of office space that you've got?
We were down the track on this anyway. So we work alongside other group companies and engage, because we kind of shared office space. We have big sales floors with different group companies all kind of sharing a proportion of the floor. We'd recently moved to a temporary office in Houndsditch, which is a WeWork office, whilst we were having our head office decorated. So it's a WeWork head office. We have a whole floor in one of their new buildings in Moorgate, but it wasn't going to be big enough for all the staff that we were going to be moving across there, because we were looking to move to this booking system where if you're working in the office and you're not out at meetings, you book yourself a desk, it's all very much hot desking, etc. But we were kind of moving to a smaller provision already, because that's how we sort of saw things with this remote working and people being able to kind of, go out and do meetings, etc. I think this has almost enabled us to kind of try before we do it and kind of see what the pitfalls are, understand kind of, where we do need people in the office and where we don't. And actually, that seems like a really strong plan now. I think we can see how that will become a reality, a rotational system where people are in the office 2 or 3 days a week where they need to have some interaction or whatever. And then there's the remote working element as well. So I think we're headed that way anyway, not just from a cost perspective, but just because of the demand for that flexible working and kind of the positive benefits we've seen from that. And I think lockdown has really just been a great sort of testing ground to be able to just see how we make that work effectively with the use of video calling, etc. We're looking to carry that on, as soon as we get back to the office, if and when people come back to the office, most meetings will now still be conducted via video link, even if we're in the office, so that we can include people who aren't. So it's going to feel the same as lockdown ideally, but you have some people's physical presence in the office. So yeah, we were already kind of going down that track, and it feels like we're going in the right direction, which is good.
So sort of following on from that, if we look in that social worker market and an area across the board, health as well, where safeguarding is a key point, are you finding a relaxation in what safeguarding through an interview process or testing process looks like? Are your customers utilizing Zoom for interviewing, and can they do that effectively?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing clearly for it's been relaxed in terms of, identify ID and right to work, but also for the sort of DBS police checking service. There used to have to be a face-to-face meeting, but that can now be done by video calling. I think the only thing that presents a slight challenge is the safer interviewing, which we do with social workers, which you need to see body language. And so sometimes on a video setup, it's hard to kind of really, so you need them to be in a well-lit room. You need to be able to see more than just the head and the shoulders. You've got to be able to see the body. But I think all sorts of possibilities are now becoming a reality because we've had to adapt over this period. Most local authorities, believe it or not, and we've been really surprised by this, we're like, this is all going to go disastrously wrong. Technology in local authorities is not generally very good. They have mobilized and moved things to a working from home environment very swiftly, and they seem to have adapted really well across the NHS and local authority. And we're doing all interviews via video link up now. Client meetings, candidate meetings, and actually it feels like it's been long enough now in lockdown that people have got the confidence. And I think there will, some of that will be taken forward. I think there'll be a lot less face-to-face meetings. We just need to make sure that through the safeguarding process, we are doing what we need to do to make sure that those individuals that we need to identify as a risk are not being put into those vulnerable, working with vulnerables. And I think we just need to make sure it is a safe process. But I think there's an awful lot going on, and considerations, Tania, you'll reinforce this, being made from a Home Office perspective around what that might look like moving forward.
Yeah, so we're expecting the Prime Minister to speak just at lunchtime today about opening the environment up in different ways. And some people worried about it. Some people think there's definitely a pull me and push you kind of scenario going on. And we're coming toward the end of this session. So I'll ask if it's okay briefly. The view is that people are going to start coming back to the office and that we need to. I mean, the Bank of England was under the impression we could have gone bust as a country in March. Are we going to see a big change from an economic point of view with big corporations paying higher tax bills? Are smaller businesses going to have to pay bigger tax bills to pay for COVID-19? Are you expecting it? Are you worrying about it, Ross?
I mean, I'm definitely expecting it. The government is going to need to get the money from somewhere over the next few years. So, one of the things on the 6-point strategy is cash conservation. So, I think lots of companies, all CFOs, are holding on to their cash as much as they can, and we have to realise that it will be no surprise if personal tax goes up as well as corporation tax.
Yeah, I think that's right. Bear with me. What I need to do is bring this session to an end. I don't know about you guys, but to be honest, I could have been here for the rest of the afternoon. There's a lot of stuff going on there, a lot of things that have already affected our businesses. But life doesn't seem so bad for the recruitment market today. Things do change. I'll re-quote Ross, a week is a long time in the recruitment market, and it definitely is. But even a day, during COVID-19, a day's been a fairly long time in the recruitment market. But there are opportunities. Some of our APSCo members are actively recruiting staff. And if you look at Our two panel members from the market today, neither of whom have made redundancies yet, aren't necessarily looking to do that, but will do what they can do to keep their businesses afloat and keep their current members of staff safe and well. And I thank both Debbie Smith and Ross Eades for giving us an insight into their businesses. I really appreciate that. Can I also just let everybody know that at 2 p.m. today, we have Tina Holt, who is going to talk about returning to the office and what you need to do. 2 o'clock on Thursday, we have Mike Lander. He's coming back because his session on looking at how to negotiate with procurement teams who might be looking at utilising COVID to their advantage was pretty much a sellout last time. He's coming back to cover that 2 o'clock on Thursday. I would highly recommend that session as well. Thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate everybody out there giving their time, and particularly our panel members, 3 of them, for giving us their time and for being so open and honest about their business. Stay safe, and I'll speak to you again. I'll be in France next week, but speak to you from France. Stay safe. Thank you. Thank you, panel members. Take care. Bye-bye.